She found the divorce papers hidden under his desk, filed 3 weeks ago, while he was still kissing her goodbye every morning, while he was still touching her belly and whispering to their unborn baby, while she was painting the nursery yellow. He had drained their savings, $180,000, gone. He had signed a lease with another woman. And when she confronted him, he did not yell. He did not apologize. He opened the front door, pointed to a suitcase the housekeeper had packed that morning, and said 5 words that shattered her entire world. "You have nothing. Get out." 7 months pregnant, $43 in her pocket, credit cards canceled, no family, no friends. He had made sure of that years ago. She ended up on a park bench in the pouring rain, whispering to her unborn daughter, "Just hold on, baby. Mommy is figuring this out." But she was not figuring it out. She was freezing. She was breaking. And the man she trusted most in this world had planned her destruction with the same precision he used to close business deals. What happened next will shock you. Because the woman who walked into that storm with nothing walked out with something her husband never saw coming. And by the end of this story, you will understand exactly why he lost everything and she gained it all. Lesson and value. This story carries a truth that every woman needs to hear at least once. Your worth is not measured by what someone else allows you to have. It is measured by what you refuse to let them take. If you have ever trusted the wrong person, if you have ever felt trapped, if you have ever wondered whether starting over is even possible, this story is your answer. It is possible. And it starts the moment you decide that you deserve more than a locked door and a packed suitcase. If this story hit close to home, or if it reminded you of someone you love, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a story that could change the way you see your own strength. Drop a comment and tell me where you are listening from today. I read every single one. And if you know a woman who needs to hear this tonight, share this story with her. Sometimes one story at the right moment can remind someone that they are not as alone as they feel. Now, stay with me, because this journey is just getting started. The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight, the kind of cold, relentless downpour that soaks through everything and settles deep into your bones until you forget what warmth ever felt like. Jennifer Cole sat on a metal park bench in the middle of a deserted city park, her arms wrapped tight around her swollen belly, her thin coat plastered to her skin like a second layer of defeat. She was 32 years old, 7 months pregnant, and she had exactly $43 left to her name. Her lips moved in the darkness, whispering words meant only for the tiny life shifting inside her. "Just hold on a little longer, okay? Mommy is figuring this out. I promise you, baby. Mommy is figuring this out." But she was not figuring it out. She was sitting on a bench in the rain at 11:47 at night with no home, no family, no plan, and no idea how she had arrived at this exact moment in her life. 6 hours ago, she had been painting a nursery wall soft yellow. 6 hours ago, she had believed she was loved. A police cruiser rolled slowly past the park entrance, its headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. Jennifer watched it stop, reverse, and pull up to the curb. A young officer stepped out, pulling his collar up against the downpour, and walked towards her with the careful posture of someone approaching a situation he did not want to deal with. "Ma'am, you cannot sleep here," he said, his flashlight sweeping across her face. "Are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" Jennifer opened her mouth, but the words caught somewhere between her throat and the truth. Call who? Martin had made sure she had no one left to call. Her mother's number had been disconnected for 3 years. Her best friend from college had changed her number after Martin convinced Jennifer that real wives did not need outside friendships. Every bridge had been burned so slowly, so methodically, that she had not even smelled the smoke until she was standing alone in the ashes. "I am fine," she managed, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I am just waiting for someone." The officer studied her for a long moment, his eyes dropping to her belly, then back to her face. Something flickered in his expression. Maybe sympathy, maybe discomfort, maybe both. He opened his mouth to say something else, but before he could speak, a voice cut through the rain from across the street. "She is with me, officer. Unless you want to explain to Channel 7 News why you arrested a pregnant woman for sitting on a bench in the rain." Jennifer turned toward the voice and saw a woman marching across the street from a brightly lit diner, holding an umbrella in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. She was in her late 50s, heavy-set, wearing nurse's scrubs under a raincoat, and she moved with the kind of authority that suggested she had been handling difficult situations since before the officer was born. The officer looked at the woman, then at Jennifer, then back at the woman. He seemed to calculate the odds of this ending well for him and decided they were not favorable. "You ladies have a good night," he said, and walked back to his cruiser. The woman watched him drive away, then turned to Jennifer, extending the coffee cup with a matter-of-fact expression that carried zero sentimentality and 100% practicality. "My name is Diane Washington. Everybody calls me Dee. I work the night shift at that diner, and I have been watching you sit on this bench for the last 2 hours trying to decide whether to come over or mind my own business. Business lost. Drink this. It is decaf." Jennifer took the cup with trembling fingers, the warmth almost painful against her frozen skin. She wanted to say thank you, but what came out instead was a sound she did not recognize, something between a gasp and a sob that broke free from somewhere deep inside her chest and shattered the fragile composure she had been desperately maintaining. Dee sat down beside her on the wet bench without hesitation, not flinching at the cold metal or the rain soaking through her scrubs. She put one arm around Jennifer's shaking shoulders and said nothing for a full minute, just letting her cry with the patience of someone who understood that some pain needs to spill before it can be cleaned up. When the sobs finally slowed to shaky breaths, Dee spoke again, her voice softer now but still carrying that unshakable steadiness. "Okay, here's what we are going to do. You are going to stand up. You are going to walk across that street with me. You are going to sit in my diner where it is warm and dry. You are going to eat something because that baby needs fuel even if you do not feel like eating. And then you are going to tell me what happened. Or you are not going to tell me. Either way, you are not spending another minute on this bench. That is not a suggestion." Jennifer looked at this stranger, this woman who had no reason to care, no obligation to help, no connection to her life whatsoever, and felt something she had not felt in months. Not safety, not yet, but the faintest, most fragile flicker of something that might eventually become hope if she could keep it alive long enough. She nodded. Dee helped her to her feet, held the umbrella over her, and walked her across the street into the warm glow of the diner. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and the smell of coffee and grilled food wrapped around Jennifer like the first kind embrace she had received in longer than she could remember. Dee guided her to a booth in the back corner, disappeared for 30 seconds, and returned with a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice. She set it down in front of Jennifer and slid into the opposite seat. "Eat first," she said firmly. "Story later. Or no story, but eat." Jennifer picked up the fork, and as the first bite of warm food hit her stomach, she felt the tears start again. Not from sadness this time, but from the almost overwhelming sensation of being treated like a human being by another human being after months of being treated like furniture. Dee watched her eat, her expression unreadable, but her eyes carried a depth of understanding that suggested she knew exactly what this kind of pain felt like. Around her neck, a small gold locket caught the light, and her fingers touched it briefly, unconsciously, the way people touch things that connect them to someone they have lost. Jennifer noticed, but did not ask. Some pain announces itself. Other pain hides in small gold lockets and brief touches that last barely a second. When the plate was empty, Dee refilled the coffee and leaned back. "Honey," she said, her voice carrying the particular gentleness of someone who has earned the right to be blunt, "I have had 2 ex-husbands. The first one left me for his secretary. The second one left me for his secretary's husband. At least yours had the decency to be predictable about it." Jennifer stared at her for a moment. The word so unexpected, so absurdly honest, that something extraordinary happened. She almost laughed. It was barely there, just a tremor at the corner of her mouth, a tiny crack in the wall of despair. But it was real, and it was the first human moment she had experienced in longer than she could measure. Dee saw it and nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said. "If you can almost laugh, you can survive. Now." What happened? And sitting in that warm booth, in the back of a diner, at midnight, with rain streaming down the windows and a stranger who had already shown her more kindness than her husband had in years, Jennifer Cole went back to the beginning. 6 hours earlier, Jennifer had been standing in the nursery of the house she shared with her husband, Martin Cole, carefully painting a wall the color of soft morning sunshine. The room smelled like fresh paint and possibility, and she had been humming a lullaby she barely remembered from her own childhood, one hand resting on her belly, where the baby kicked in steady rhythms that made her smile every single time. The nursery was her favorite room in the house. She had designed it herself, drawing on the interior design degree she had earned before Martin convinced her that real partnership meant one person earning and one person supporting. She had chosen every color, every piece of furniture, every small detail, with the careful love of a woman preparing a world for someone she had not yet met, but already loved more than anything she had ever known. Martin had been distant for months, but Jennifer had attributed it to stress. He was a commercial real estate developer, and deals went sour sometimes. He worked late. He traveled. He was short-tempered. She made excuses for all of it, because that is what you do when you have invested your entire identity into a marriage, and the alternative is admitting that the foundation you built your life on is made of sand. She had gone to Martin's home, office, to borrow a roll of painter's tape when she saw the folder. It was sitting on his desk, partially hidden under a stack of contracts, but the corner was visible, and something about it caught her eye. Maybe it was the color of the tab. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the universe finally deciding she had earned the right to know the truth. She pulled it out and opened it. The first document was a set of divorce papers, already filed. The filing date was 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. 21 days during which Martin had kissed her goodbye every morning, asked about her doctor's appointments, and placed his hand on her belly while telling her he could not wait to be a father. 21 days of performance, so convincing she never suspected a thing. The second document was a bank statement showing that $180,000 had been transferred out of their joint savings account into an account she had never seen before. Their entire savings. The money they had set aside for the baby, for emergencies, for the future Martin had promised her every night before they fell asleep. The third document was a lease agreement for a luxury apartment downtown. The name on the lease was Vanessa Laurent. Jennifer stood in the doorway of his office, holding the folder with both hands, and felt the world restructure itself around her like a building collapsing floor by floor. Everything she had believed, everything she had sacrificed for, everything she had told herself was worth the loneliness and the isolation and the slowly shrinking boundaries of her life. All of it disintegrated in the time it took to read 3 pieces of paper. She was still standing there when Martin came home. He walked through the front door at 6:15, jacket over his arm, phone in his hand, and stopped when he saw her in the hallway holding the folder. His expression did not change. That was the detail that would haunt her for months afterward. His expression did not change. He looked at her the way you look at a minor inconvenience, a traffic light that turned red when you were running late. "I was going to tell you this weekend," he said, his voice carrying the casual indifference of a man returning a library book he never finished reading. Jennifer's voice shook when she spoke. 3 weeks. You filed 3 weeks ago. You took our money. You signed a lease with another woman. And you are going to tell me this weekend?" Martin set his jacket on the hall table and loosened his tie. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, almost rehearsed. "Jennifer, let us not make this dramatic. The marriage has been over for a long time. You know it. I know it. The only difference is I had the courage to act on it." "The courage?" Jennifer's voice cracked. "You drained our bank account while I was painting a nursery for your child. You signed a lease with your girlfriend while telling me you were working late. That is not courage, Martin. That is cowardice dressed in a suit." Something shifted in Martin's eyes then, something cold and flat that she had seen glimpses of over the years, but had always explained away. He stepped closer, not threatening, not aggressive, just close enough that she could smell his cologne and the faint trace of a perfume that was not hers. "Let me be clear," he said, and his voice dropped to a tone she had never heard before. Smooth, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. "This house is in my name. The car you drive is in my company's name. The bank accounts are in my name. Even the credit cards you carry are authorized extensions of my accounts, and they were canceled this morning. You have nothing, Jennifer, because you built nothing. You existed in my life at my discretion, and that discretion has ended." The words landed like physical blows, each one calculated to hit exactly where it would cause the most damage. Jennifer felt her knees weaken, felt the room tilt slightly, felt the baby kick hard as if reacting to the stress flooding through her body. "You cannot do this," she whispered. "I am 7 months pregnant with your child." Martin opened the front door. The rain had already started outside, fat drops hitting the pavement with the sound of something ending. He gestured toward the doorway with a casual sweep of his hand, and Jennifer saw what was waiting on the porch. Her suitcase, packed. The housekeeper had done it that morning while Jennifer was buying paint for the nursery. The magnitude of the planning behind that single suitcase nearly broke her. This was not a man acting on impulse. This was not a fight that got out of hand. This was an execution, planned weeks in advance, with the same attention to detail Martin applied to his real estate deals. She was a property being liquidated, a line item being removed from a spreadsheet, a problem being solved with maximum efficiency and minimum emotional expenditure. "Martin, please," she said. And she hated herself for the begging in her voice, hated that his cruelty could reduce her to this when she had once been a woman with talent and ambition and dreams that did not revolve around any man. Martin checked his watch. "The Uber I called for you should be here in about 10 minutes. I would suggest you use it. After tonight, I will not be paying for your transportation." Jennifer picked up her suitcase with hands that felt disconnected from her body. She walked through the door into the rain, and Martin closed it behind her with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam ever could. The lock turned. The porch light went off. She stood in the rain for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened, trying to find some handhold of logic or reason in the smooth wall of cruelty that had just closed around her. The Uber never came. Of course it did not. Martin had never called one. It was one final manipulation, one last demonstration of control, keeping her standing on the porch long enough to feel the full weight of her humiliation before the rain drove her away. She called her mother first. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. She called her college friend, Sarah Mitchell. The number you have dialed has been changed. The new number is unlisted. She called 911. The dispatcher listened, then explained carefully that this was a civil matter, not a criminal emergency. She could file for a protective order on Monday. There were shelters she could contact. Would she like those numbers? Jennifer wrote down the numbers with a pen that barely worked on a receipt she found in her coat pocket. She called the first shelter. Full. The second shelter. No answer. The third shelter required intake during business hours only. It was 8:17 in the evening. $43 in her wallet. Credit cards canceled. No car, no family, no friends, 7 months pregnant, pouring rain. She started walking. Jennifer told Dee all of this in the back booth of the diner. While the rain hammered the windows and the coffee grew cold, she told it without drama, without embellishment, in the flat, exhausted voice of someone who had been hollowed out so completely that even the telling felt like an echo of an echo. When she finished, Dee was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table, took Jennifer's hands in hers, and said something Jennifer would remember for the rest of her life. That man did not break you, honey. He just made you think he did. There is a difference, and you are going to learn that difference starting right now. Jennifer spent the night on a narrow cot in the diner's back storage room, surrounded by boxes of napkins and industrial-sized containers of ketchup. It was not comfortable, it was not dignified, but it was dry and warm and safe. And down after 7 hours on a park bench in the rain, those three things felt like luxuries she had not earned. She woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Dee's voice cutting through the morning like a blade wrapped in velvet. You are eating for 2, so I made enough for 3. Do not argue with me. My kitchen, my rules. Jennifer sat up slowly, her body aching from the cot and the cold and the accumulated exhaustion of everything that had happened. Her belly felt heavy and tight, and the baby moved restlessly, as if sensing its mother's distress. She placed both hands on her stomach and took a slow breath, then another, counting them the way the pregnancy books recommended for stress management. The diner was mostly empty at 6:30 in the morning. Just a couple of construction workers at the counter and an elderly man reading a newspaper by the window. Jennifer ate the pancakes Dee set in front of her, each bite a small act of defiance against the voice in her head that sounded like Martin telling her she deserved none of this. Dee sat across from her, drinking coffee and watching with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades reading people across diner tables. I called the women's shelter on Pine Street, Dee said. They have a bed opening up tomorrow. It is not the Ritz, but it is safe, and they have a prenatal care program. We can get you in there while we figure out the legal situation. Jennifer nodded, grateful beyond expression, but the word legal made her stomach clench. She had no money for a lawyer. She had no documentation. Martin had controlled everything, every account, every file, every piece of paper that proved she existed as anything other than his wife. I do not even have my own bank account, Jennifer said quietly, the shame of the admission burning in her chest. I let him handle everything. I let him convince me that was what partnership meant. Dee set down her coffee cup with a deliberate firmness. Honey, do not do that. Do not sit there and blame yourself for trusting someone you loved. That man ran a con on you. A long, patient, calculated con. The only thing you did wrong was believe that the person who promised to love you was telling the truth. That is not a character flaw. That is being human. The bell above the diner door chimed at 7:15, and a man walked in who looked like he belonged in a completely different world than the one Jennifer currently occupied. He was tall, early 40s, wearing a simple, dark jacket over a gray sweater, but everything about him communicated a quiet, understated wealth, the kind that does not need to announce itself because it is too busy being competent. He sat at the counter, 2 stools down from the construction workers, and ordered a black coffee without looking at the menu. His phone buzzed constantly, and he answered one call with a clipped tone that Jennifer could partially overhear. "No, Mother, I am not selling Sarah's paintings. That conversation is over. I said that conversation is over. Goodbye." He hung up and stared at his coffee with the expression of a man carrying something heavy that he had not yet figured out how to put down. Dee walked over to him with the easy familiarity of a regular interaction. "Morning, Mark. You look like you fought your alarm clock and lost." The man, Mark, managed a tired half smile. "My mother called at 5:30 to discuss my dead wife's art collection. So yes, the alarm clock was the least of my problems." Dee glanced back toward Jennifer, then leaned on the counter with a casualness that Jennifer would later realize was entirely calculated. "I need a favor," Dee said. "That pregnant girl in my back booth needs a lawyer, a good one, the kind who does not charge $10,000 to file a piece of paper. You know people. Help or get out of my booth." Mark looked toward Jennifer for the first time. Their eyes met briefly, and Jennifer saw something pass across his face, not attraction, not pity, but a flicker of recognition, the kind of look one wounded person gives another when they see the familiar shape of pain they know intimately. Then he looked away. "I will make some calls," he said, pulling out his phone. "But that is all I can do right now, Dee. I am not in a position to take on anyone else's problems." Dee said nothing, just raised one eyebrow with an eloquence that communicated more than a paragraph of words could have. Mark left 20 minutes later without speaking to Jennifer directly. She watched him walk to a car parked outside, and even through the rain-streaked window, she could tell it cost more than the house she had just been kicked out of. The contrast between his world and hers felt like a physical distance measured in miles of impossibility. Dee came back to the booth and slid a piece of paper across the table. On it was a name and phone number, written in Mark's handwriting. "Claire Buchanan," Dee read aloud. "Family law attorney. Mark says she is the best, and she does pro bono cases for women in situations like yours. He already called her. She is expecting to hear from you this afternoon." Jennifer stared at the paper, then looked at Dee. Why would he do that? "He does not know me." Dee touched the gold locket at her neck, a gesture so brief it was almost invisible. Because some people carry enough pain that they cannot stand to watch someone else drown in theirs. "Now call that lawyer." Jennifer called Claire Buchanan at 2:14 that afternoon from Dee's personal cell phone. The conversation lasted 47 minutes and changed everything. Claire's voice was sharp, focused, and completely devoid of the false sympathy Jennifer had been dreading. She asked direct questions and expected direct answers. "How long were you married? Did you work during the marriage? Whose name is on the accounts? Did he give you written notice of the divorce filing? Do you have any documentation of the financial transfers?" When Jennifer answered no to most of these questions, Claire did not sigh or express disappointment. Instead, she said something that planted the first real seed of fight in Jennifer's exhausted heart. "Your husband did not just leave you, Jennifer. He executed a financial ambush. This was planned like a military operation, which means he left a trail, because operations that complex always leave trails. My job is to find those trails. Your job is to survive long enough for me to do mine. For the first time since Martin closed the door on her, Jennifer felt something other than despair. It was small and fragile and buried under layers of fear and exhaustion, but it was there. Direction, a single clear step in a darkness that had felt completely impenetrable. That evening, Mark returned to the diner. He ordered the same black coffee, sat at the same stool, and this time he turned to Jennifer. "Did you call Claire?" Jennifer nodded. "She is filing emergency motions tomorrow." Mark studied her for a moment, his expression careful, guarded. "Good. She is the best at what she does. You are in good hands." He turned back to his coffee, and Jennifer thought that would be the end of it. A rich man's casual good deed, a phone call made, a conscience cleared, a story he might mention at dinner parties about the time he helped a stranger. But Dee had other plans. She leaned across this counter and looked at Mark with the same no-nonsense expression she had used on the police officer the night before. "She needs a place to stay," Dee said flatly. "The shelter is full until next Tuesday, and she cannot sleep in my storage room for a week. You have a guest house the size of most people's actual houses, and it has been sitting empty for 2 years collecting dust and guilt. Make it useful." Mark's jaw tightened. "Dee, that was not a question, Mark." The silence stretched between them for several seconds. Jennifer watched the conflict play across Mark's face, the reluctance fighting with something deeper, something that looked like obligation or memory or the specific kind of pain that comes from knowing you could help and choosing not to. Finally, he exhaled. "It is a guest house," he said, looking at Jennifer directly. "Separate entrance, separate keys. No strings, no expectations. You can stay until you find something permanent." Jennifer met his eyes, and for the first time she saw, past the wealth and the composure to something rawer underneath. This man was not offering charity. He was offering penance for something she did not yet understand. "I will pay rent," she said, "when I can. I insist." Mark blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Then something shifted in his expression, something like respect. "Okay," he said, "when you can." Jennifer moved into Mark Elliott's guest house the following morning. It was small by his standards, but by any normal measurement it was beautiful. A 2-bedroom cottage with clean white walls, a kitchen stocked with basics, and windows that looked out onto a garden that someone had once loved and then abandoned to grow wild. She set her single suitcase on the bed and sat beside it, placing both hands on her belly. The baby kicked. "We have a roof, little one," she whispered. "That is step 1. Step 2 starts tomorrow." Claire Buchanan's office was on the 3rd floor of a building that looked unimpressive from the outside and formidable from the inside. The walls were lined with framed court victories, and Claire herself was exactly what her phone voice had promised, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair, reading glasses she wore like armor, and the focused intensity of someone who had spent 30 years fighting battles other lawyers considered unwinnable. Jennifer sat across from her, holding a folder of documents she had spent 3 days assembling from memory. Fragments of bank statements, screenshots of texts she had backed up to the cloud before Martin wiped her phone, and a detailed timeline of every financial decision Martin had made without her knowledge or consent. Claire reviewed everything with the methodical precision of a surgeon examining x-rays. She made notes, she asked questions, she circled dates and drew arrows between documents. After 20 minutes, she looked up. "Your husband made 3 critical mistakes," she said, holding up 3 fingers. First, he filed the divorce papers before formally notifying you, which in this state gives us grounds to challenge the timeline and protect certain assets. Second, he transferred funds from a joint account without your written consent, which is a violation of fiduciary duty. Third, and this is the one that matters most, he left a digital trail. Men who think they are smarter than everyone else always do. Jennifer felt something shift inside her chest, a small flame of determination catching where there had only been ashes. The first hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Claire filed emergency motions for temporary custody, temporary spousal support, and a restraining order based on the documented pattern of financial abuse and coercive control. The motions were detailed, aggressive, and devastating. During those 3 weeks, Jennifer did something she had not done in years. She took action on her own behalf. She remembered that her entire interior design portfolio was saved on a cloud drive that Martin did not know about, an old account from before they were married that she had never thought to close. She logged in and found everything: her best work, her client testimonials, her design concepts. It was like finding a photograph of the person she used to be before Martin erased her. She contacted a former client named Rebecca Torres, who had loved Jennifer's work on her living room 3 years earlier. Rebecca was renovating her kitchen and had been looking for a designer. She offered Jennifer a freelance contract. It was small, barely enough to cover groceries, but it was income she had earned with her own talent, and it meant more to her than any amount Martin had ever deposited into their joint account. Mark noticed the change in her. Over the 3 weeks of waiting, their interactions shifted from polite distance to cautious familiarity. He would leave fresh fruit and herbal tea on the guest house porch without being asked. She would find notes from him, brief and practical, about doctor's appointments he had researched and grocery deliveries he had arranged. But on the 8th day, Jennifer walked into the guest house and found that Mark had installed a full security system without telling her. Cameras at every entrance, motion sensors on the windows, a control panel by the door with a code she had not been given. She found Mark in his study and stood in the doorway until he looked up. "Take it down," she said, and her voice was steady in a way that surprised both of them. Mark frowned. "Jennifer, Martin is unpredictable. The security is for your protection. I was going to tell you about it. You were going to tell me about it after you decided what I needed without asking me." She took a step closer, and the words came from a place she had not accessed in years. "I just left a man who controlled every aspect of my life, who decided what I ate, who I talked to, how I spent my time, and where I was allowed to exist. If you want to help me, then help me, but do not decide what I need without asking me, ever. Do you understand the difference?" The room went quiet. Mark stared at her, and she watched something move behind his eyes, the recognition that he had crossed a line he had not seen, the understanding that his instinct to protect had collided with her need to choose. "You are right," he said, and his voice carried genuine remorse. "I am sorry. I will have it removed today, and we can discuss what security measures you would like to have in place. Together." Jennifer nodded. "The system stays, but next time, you ask first." That exchange changed everything between them. Mark stopped treating her like someone to be saved and started treating her like someone to be respected. Jennifer stopped expecting his help to come with conditions and started accepting it with a confidence rooted in the knowledge that she could walk away at any time. The power dynamic shifted from rescuer and rescued to something closer to equals navigating complicated circumstances with mutual respect. The day of the first hearing arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt heavy with consequence. Claire had prepared extensively, and Jennifer had rehearsed her testimony until the words felt like part of her body. Martin appeared in court with an expensive attorney, a tailored suit, and the relaxed confidence of a man who believed the system was designed to serve him. Claire was devastating. She presented evidence of the undisclosed financial transfers, the premature divorce filing, the pattern of isolation and financial control. She painted a clear, methodical picture of a man who had systematically stripped his pregnant wife of every resource and relationship before discarding her. Martin's attorney objected frequently. The judge overruled most of them. When it was over, Judge Harmon ruled in Jennifer's favor. Temporary custody granted. Temporary spousal support ordered. Restraining order issued. Martin was to have no contact with Jennifer outside of court, supervised communications. Jennifer walked out of the courthouse and sat on a bench in the sun, letting the warmth hit her face while Claire explained the next steps. Dee had taken the morning off from the diner and was waiting in the parking lot with a homemade cake that said, "Survived in blue frosting," because, as Dee explained, "I do not believe in counting chickens, but I absolutely believe in cake." Mark was there too, standing a respectful distance away. But Jennifer could see the relief in his posture, the slight loosening of shoulders that had been tense for weeks. That night, Jennifer slept deeply for the first time since Martin threw her out. She dreamed of the nursery she had been painting, the soft yellow walls, and the baby kicking to the rhythm of a lullaby she was finally beginning to remember. She woke at 6 in the morning, feeling something she had almost forgotten how to identify. Hope. Real, solid, grounded hope. Then the doorbell rang. A process server stood on the porch, holding a thick envelope with Jennifer's name printed in bold type. She signed for it with steady hands, opened it in the kitchen, and felt the hope drain from her body like water from a cracked vessel. Martin's attorney had filed an emergency appeal. The documents claimed that Jennifer was cohabitating with a wealthy man and therefore did not require spousal support. Attached were surveillance photographs of Jennifer entering Mark's guest house, taken at angles carefully chosen to make it look like she was entering his main residence. The timestamps showed late evenings. The framing suggested romance. The appeal also contained an affidavit from a private investigator Martin had hired, stating that Jennifer appeared to be living in luxury accommodation and had no genuine need for financial assistance from her estranged husband. Jennifer sat at the kitchen table and stared at the photographs for a long time. Each one was a lie, constructed from a fragment of truth, the most dangerous kind of weapon a man like Martin could wield. She picked up her phone and called Claire. "He is not done," she said, "and neither am I." Martin Cole did not fight like a man who wanted to win a divorce. He fought like a man who wanted to destroy everything in his path, a scorched earth campaign designed not just to defeat Jennifer, but to eliminate every support system, every resource, and every shred of dignity she had managed to rebuild. The attacks came on 3 fronts simultaneously, and they were orchestrated with the precision of someone who had spent his career closing deals by identifying and exploiting every weakness in his opponent's position. The first front was professional. Rebecca Torres called Jennifer on a Thursday morning, her voice strained with obvious discomfort. "Jennifer, I am so sorry, but I have to cancel the project. I received a cease and desist letter yesterday from Cole Properties claiming that the design concepts you proposed to me are proprietary intellectual property belonging to Martin's company. My lawyer says I cannot risk the liability." Jennifer's chest tightened. The designs were entirely her own, created years before she ever met Martin. But proving that required time, money, and legal resources she did not have, and Martin knew it. The second front was personal. A social worker from Child Protective Services appeared at the guest house 48 hours later, clipboard in hand, professional smile fixed in place. We received an anonymous tip regarding the living conditions of a pregnant woman at this address. This is a routine welfare check, ma'am. May I come in? Jennifer let her in because she had nothing to hide, but the violation of it, the knowledge that Martin had weaponized a system designed to protect children in order to harass their mother, made her hands shake with a fury she had to physically suppress. The social worker looked at the clean, well-maintained guest house, noted the stocked kitchen, the prepared nursery, and the obvious care Jennifer had put into her living space. She left after an hour, marking the visit as satisfactory, but the damage was done. The investigation would remain open as a note in the file, a piece of ammunition Martin could reference later to build a pattern of instability. The third front was the one that nearly shattered everything. An anonymous package arrived at the home of Eleanor Elliott, Mark's mother. Inside were fabricated documents claiming that Jennifer had been fired from her previous design firm for embezzlement. Included was a forged termination letter, fake financial records, and a typed note that read simply, "Ask your son who he is really protecting." Eleanor Ray Elliott was old money Boston, the kind of woman who measured character in generations and considered scandal a hereditary disease. She called Mark immediately. "I need you to listen to me carefully," she said, her voice carrying the particular frost of a mother who believes she is saving her child from himself. "That woman is using you, Mark. She is exploiting your guilt over Sarah to extract money and shelter from you, and now I have evidence that she is a convicted thief. You are repeating your pattern. You could not save Sarah, and now you are trying to save this woman to make yourself feel better." Mark's response was sharp. "Those documents are fake, Mother. Martin Cole is trying to destroy her, and you are helping him." But Eleanor's words burrowed under his skin in the days that followed, not because he believed them, but because they touched the one wound he had never been able to close. Sarah, his late wife, the woman who had died in a car accident 2 years ago while driving away from him after a terrible fight. The guilt he carried from that night was the foundation on which his entire relationship with Jennifer was built, and Eleanor had identified it with the surgical precision that only mothers possess. Mark began to pull away, not dramatically, not cruelly, but in the small ways that mattered. He stopped leaving notes on the porch. He canceled a doctor's appointment he had scheduled for Jennifer without explanation. He was cordial once they spoke, but the warmth had been replaced by something careful, something guarded. Jennifer noticed immediately. The withdrawal felt like a familiar coldness, and it triggered every instinct Martin's abuse had wired into her nervous system. Then came the DNA motion. Martin's attorney filed a petition demanding a paternity test, claiming that Martin had reason to believe the child was not biologically his. The motion was accompanied by a sworn statement from Martin asserting that Jennifer had been unfaithful during their marriage. It was a lie. Jennifer knew it was a lie. Martin knew it was a lie. But the legal process required the claim to be addressed, which meant delays, which meant more hearings, which meant more time during which Martin could continue his campaign of destruction while Jennifer waited for the system to catch up with the truth. Claire Buchanan was furious. "This is a delay tactic, pure and simple," she told Jennifer. "He does not believe this baby is not his. He is trying to drain your emotional resources and stretch the legal timeline until you break." Jennifer sat in Claire's office and felt the walls closing in. Her freelance work had been destroyed. CPS had been called. Mark was pulling away. Her character was being assassinated with forged documents. And now the very identity of her child was being questioned as a strategic, legal maneuver. She went back to the guest house that evening and sat at the kitchen table in silence. $12 in her bank account. No income. No family. The one friend she had made, Dee, was working double shifts and could not be burdened further. The one man who had helped her was retreating behind walls of guilt she did not fully understand. She whispered to her belly in the darkness, "I do not know how to do this." The baby kicked, hard, as if disagreeing. Jennifer sat with that kick for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Dee. "I need help," she said. "Real help, the kind where we stop reacting and start planning." Dee arrived at the guest house 30 minutes later with a thermos of coffee and a legal pad. They sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, and by the time Dee left, Jennifer had a plan. She could not outspend Martin. She could not outpower him. But she could outwork him, and she could outthink him, because Martin's greatest weakness was the same thing that made him dangerous. He believed he was the smartest person in every room, and people who believe that always leave trails. The next morning, Jennifer did just 3 things before sunrise. First, she called Claire and asked her to subpoena every financial record Martin had generated in the past 2 years, business and personal, including records from any entity in which he held a controlling interest. Claire had been requesting limited financial discovery, but Jennifer wanted everything. Every transaction, every transfer, every shell company. Second, she contacted Mark directly and asked to meet him in the garden between the main house and the guest house. When he arrived, guarded and careful, she did not ask for help. She told him the truth. "Your mother received forged documents about me. They were sent by Martin to destroy your trust in me. I cannot control what your mother believes, and I cannot control what you believe. But I can tell you that I have never stolen anything from anyone, and if you need to verify that, I will sign whatever release you need to investigate my background yourself. I would rather you know the truth than wonder." Mark was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I do not need to investigate you, Jennifer. I need to stop letting my guilt make decisions for both of us. I am sorry." Something cracked open between them. Not romance, not yet, but a trust built on honesty rather than dependence. It was the first relationship Jennifer had experienced in years that felt like it stood on solid ground. Third, Jennifer called Ray Santoro. She had met Mark's head of security briefly, a former Marine with a dry sense of humor and the observational skills of someone trained to see what others missed. She asked him a single question. If you were investigating a man who was hiding money and manipulating legal proceedings, where would you start? Ray's answer was immediate. Follow the money. Always follow the money. Claire's subpoenas produced results within 2 weeks. Martin's financial records revealed a web of shell companies, 3 of them, all registered in different states under different names, but all ultimately controlled by Martin through a series of intermediary holding structures. Money flowed through these companies in patterns that Claire's forensic accountant described as textbook asset concealment. But the real discovery, the one that changed everything, came from a detail buried in a property record that Ray Santoro found during his own investigation. The luxury apartment leased in Vanessa Lawrence's name had not been paid for with Martin's personal funds. It had been purchased outright, not leased, with money from a company called Greystone Holdings, and Greystone Holdings had received its initial funding from a trust controlled by Martin's father, Gerald Cole. Ray dug deeper. Gerald Cole was 76 years old, suffering from late-stage pancreatic cancer, and is in possession of a family trust worth approximately $40 million. The terms of the trust were specific and old-fashioned. The principal would pass to Gerald's direct descendants, but only upon the birth of a male grandchild. If no male grandchild existed, the money would be distributed to a list of charitable foundations. Martin did not have a son, but he was about to have a child. Jennifer felt the pieces click into place with a sickening clarity. Martin had not planned the divorce because he stopped loving her. He had planned it because he needed control of the baby. Not emotional control, financial control. The kind that would allow him to claim the child as his dependent, position himself as the custodial parent, and access $40 million from a dying man's trust. "He got me pregnant on purpose," Jennifer said, and the words tasted like poison. The whole marriage, the nursery, the promises, all of it was about the money. Claire leaned forward, her eyes sharp with the intensity of an attorney who had just found the key to winning her case. "And that is exactly what we are going to prove." Then something unexpected happened. Vanessa Laurent called Jennifer. The conversation lasted 45 minutes and upended everything Jennifer had assumed about the other woman. Vanessa's voice was shaky, raw, stripped of the sophistication Jennifer had imagined. "He told me you were dead," Vanessa said. "He told me you had a miscarriage and moved back to your family in Michigan. He told me the marriage ended years ago. I found out the truth last week when I saw court documents on his desk." "I am so sorry, Jennifer. I did not know." Vanessa was not the villain. She was another casualty. Martin had been lying to her with the same fluency he had lied to Jennifer, constructing separate realities for each woman that allowed him to maintain control over both. Vanessa offered to testify. She provided text messages, emails, and recordings that proved Martin had been planning the divorce since before Jennifer became pregnant. The evidence was devastating. Claire filed a massive countersuit. Martin's shell companies were exposed. His business partners were alerted to potential embezzlement. The narrative Martin had carefully constructed, the story of a reasonable man leaving an unstable wife, began to crumble. Jennifer allowed herself to feel hope again. It was cautious this time, tempered by experience, but it was there, and it felt earned rather than borrowed. Then Martin played his most dangerous card. He had recorded a conversation with Mark from weeks earlier, a heated exchange in which Mark, pushed beyond his patience, had said clearly and unmistakably, "I will destroy you if you touch her." Martin's attorney presented the recording to a judge and requested an emergency restraining order against Mark Elliott, arguing that he posed a credible threat of violence. The judge, lacking full context and operating under obligation to take threats seriously, granted the order. Mark could not come within 500 feet of Jennifer. He could not contact her. He could not visit the guest house. He could not be present at any legal proceeding involving Martin. Jennifer's protector was legally removed from her life in a single afternoon. Martin knew exactly what he was doing. Without Mark, Jennifer was vulnerable. Without Mark's resources, his security team, his emotional support, she was back to fighting alone. And Martin was not finished. The baby came early. Jennifer went into labor at 36 weeks, 3 weeks before her due date, in the guest house with no one beside her except Dee, who drove her to the hospital at 4 in the morning, while calling Claire with one hand and steering with the other. The delivery was complicated. The baby was small, and there were moments during the 12-hour labor when the monitors beeped in patterns that made the nurses move faster and speak more quietly. Jennifer gripped Dee's hand through every contraction, and Dee held on with a strength that suggested she was holding on to more than just Jennifer's fingers. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Lily Cole was born, 5 pounds 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair, a cry that filled the room and broke every wall Jennifer had built around her heart. Jennifer held her daughter against her chest and wept. Not from pain, not from fear, but from the overwhelming, devastating, beautiful reality that this tiny person existed, that she was here, that she was alive and breathing and perfect. "You are everything," Jennifer whispered against Lily's forehead. "You are absolutely everything." Dee stood beside the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks, one hand touching the gold locket she always wore. For a moment, the mask of toughness fell completely, and Jennifer saw the depth of what Dee carried. The loss of her own daughter, 20 years ago. The grief that had never fully healed. The reason she had walked across that street in the rain to help a stranger on a bench. "She is beautiful," Dee whispered, and her voice cracked on the word in a way that told Jennifer everything she needed to know about the woman who had saved her life. Mark could not come to the hospital. The restraining order kept him 500 feet away. But Ray Santoro came, standing in the doorway with a stuffed elephant and an expression that suggested he had practiced looking casual and failed completely. "From Mark," he said, handing her the elephant along with a handwritten note that contained only 6 words. "She is loved. So are you." Jennifer held the note against her chest alongside her daughter and felt, for one fragile, luminous moment, that everything might actually be okay. The moment lasted 72 hours. On the 3rd day after Lily's birth, a social worker and a county sheriff arrived at the guest house where Jennifer had brought her newborn daughter home. They carried a court order, signed by a different judge than Judge Harmon, granting Martin temporary emergency custody based on an evaluation from a psychiatrist named Dr. Richard Haynes. The evaluation stated that Jennifer exhibited symptoms of severe anxiety disorder and paranoid ideation that rendered her an unfit mother. It recommended immediate removal of the child for the child's safety, pending a full custody hearing. Jennifer read the order while holding Lily against her shoulder. The words blurred and reformed and blurred again, each sentence a blade that cut deeper than anything Martin had ever said to her face. The social worker was professional, sympathetic even. She explained the process, the timeline, the appeal options. She said she was sorry. She said she understood how difficult this was. Jennifer heard none of it. She heard only the sound of her own heartbeat and the soft breathing of the baby in her arms. Dee stood beside her, rigid with fury, but controlled enough to recognize that fighting the order physically would only give Martin more ammunition. She leaned close to Jennifer and whispered words that cost her more pain than Jennifer would ever fully understand. "Let her go now so you can get her back forever. You fight this in court, not here. Do not give him what he wants." Jennifer looked at Dee, then she looked at Lily. Then she kissed her daughter's forehead, inhaled the warm, perfect scent of her skin, and handed her to the social worker. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She stood in the doorway and watched the car drive away with her daughter inside, and she felt something inside her chest turn from grief into something harder, sharper, colder, something that was no longer afraid. She picked up her phone and called Claire. "File everything," she said. "Every single document we have. I want an emergency hearing with Judge Harmon. I want it tomorrow." Her voice did not shake. 48 hours later, catastrophe struck twice more. Mark, unable to reach Jennifer and frantic after learning that Lily had been taken, drove to Martin's office to confront him. Martin called the police. Mark was arrested for violating the restraining order and spent the night in jail. His mugshot was leaked online with a headline that read, "Tech CEO arrested after threatening father in custody battle." And that same evening, Dee did not show up for her shift at the diner. Jennifer called repeatedly. No answer. At 10:15, she received a call from the hospital. Dee had been struck by a car in a hit and run while walking to the diner. She was alive, but in intensive care with 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung. Security camera footage from a building across the street showed a black SUV, the same make and model, driven by Martin's personal driver. Jennifer sat in the guest house alone, baby taken, Mark in jail, Dee in ICU. Her 3 anchors ripped away in 72 hours. She sat in the silence for a long time. Then she opened her laptop, pulled up every document Claire had ever sent her, and began to organize them with the same careful precision she had once used to design rooms. Systematically, methodically, every piece of evidence in its proper place, every timeline verified, every contradiction highlighted. She worked until 4 in the morning. Then she showered, dressed, and drove herself to Claire's office for the first time without anyone beside her. "I am ready," she said when Claire opened the door. Claire looked at her for a long moment, seeing something in Jennifer's face that had not been there before. Not desperation, not fear, certainty. The courthouse on the morning of the emergency hearing felt different than it had during the first proceeding. The air was heavier, charged with the accumulated weight of months of cruelty, manipulation, and the specific kind of evil that hides behind tailored suits and legal procedure. Jennifer arrived early, wearing a simple navy dress that Dee had helped her choose before the accident, during one of those evenings when they had talked about what victory might look like and how to dress for it. Her hair was pulled back, her hands were steady. She carried a folder of documents organized with the precision of someone who had spent 3 days preparing for the most important fight of her life. Claire met her at the entrance, reviewing notes with the focused energy of an attorney who knew she held winning cards and intended to play every single one of them. Mark had been released from jail the previous day after Claire filed a motion demonstrating that the restraining order had been obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation of context. He was in the gallery, cleaned up but visibly drained, sitting beside his mother Eleanor, who had arrived from Boston the previous evening. Eleanor Elliott had made phone calls. Quiet, discreet, devastatingly effective phone calls. The kind of calls that old money families make when they decide to stop watching from the sidelines. She had spoken to Judge Harmon's clerk, not to influence the ruling, but to ensure that the case was properly assigned and that the previous judge, the one who had granted Martin's emergency custody order, was reviewed for conflicts of interest. It turned out that the previous judge had received campaign contributions from a PAC funded primarily by commercial real estate developers, including Martin Cole. Martin arrived at the courthouse with his attorney, a man whose hourly rate exceeded what Jennifer had earned in a month during her brief freelance career. Martin was dressed impeccably, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who had never been told no in a way that stuck. He glanced at Jennifer as he walked past her and smiled, the thin, patronizing smile of someone who considered the outcome predetermined. He did not know what was coming. Claire's opening statement was precise and devastating. She laid out the full scope of Martin's campaign in chronological order, beginning with the premeditated divorce filing, moving through the financial manipulation, the isolation, the surveillance, the CPS weaponization, the forged documents, and the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. Then she called her first witness. Vanessa Laurent took the stand looking like a woman who had recently dismantled every lie she had ever believed. She testified clearly and without hesitation. She confirmed that Martin had told her Jennifer was dead, that the baby had been miscarried, that the marriage had ended years before they met. She presented text messages and emails that proved Martin had been planning the divorce since before Jennifer became pregnant. The courtroom shifted. Jennifer could feel it, the almost imperceptible change in the air when truth becomes undeniable. Claire's second witness was Ray Santoro, who presented the results of his investigation. The shell companies, Shell, the financial transfers, Greystone Holdings, the connection to Gerald Cole's trust, the $40 million inheritance that required a grandchild. Martin's attorney objected repeatedly. Judge Harmon overruled each objection with decreasing patience. Then Claire played her final card. She called Dr. Richard Haynes, the psychiatrist whose evaluation had declared Jennifer an unfit mother. Dr. Haynes took the stand with the brittle composure of a man who had been subpoenaed against his will. Claire approached him with the deliberate calm of a predator who had already cornered her prey. Dr. Haynes, you evaluated Jennifer Cole on September 14th and concluded she was suffering from severe anxiety disorder and paranoid ideation. Is that correct? That is correct, Dr. Haynes said, adjusting his glasses. And you recommended emergency removal of her newborn child based on a single 45-minute evaluation. Is that also correct? The evaluation was thorough and based on established clinical criteria. Claire nodded slowly. Dr. Haynes, can you explain to the court why the Cole Family Foundation donated $500,000 to your clinic 14 days before you conducted that evaluation? The courtroom went silent. Dr. Haynes's face lost 2 shades of color. Martin's attorney shot to his feet, objecting. But the words were already in the air, already spreading through the room like a stain that could not be removed. Judge Harmon leaned forward. You will answer the question, Doctor. Dr. Haynes looked at Martin. Martin looked at the table in front of him, and Jennifer watched the architecture of lies that had imprisoned her for months begin to collapse in real time. But Claire was not finished. Your Honor, she said, we have one additional witness available via video conference. We request permission to present his testimony. Judge Harmon granted permission, and a screen was set up. The face that appeared was gaunt, aged by illness, but the eyes were sharp. Gerald Cole, Martin's father, was testifying from his hospital bed. His voice was frail but clear. My son came to me 6 months ago and told me his wife had miscarried. He asked me to modify the terms of my trust to give him direct access to the principal. I agreed because I believed I had no grandchild. 3 weeks ago, I learned that my granddaughter is alive, healthy, and that my son orchestrated this entire divorce to gain custody of the child for the sole purpose of accessing the trust. Gerald paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of a man confronting the final truth of his life. I failed as a father. I created a man who sees people as instruments of profit, but I will not fail as a grandfather. I am executing a new trust today. The $40 million will be held for my granddaughter, Lily, until she reaches the age of 25. My son will receive nothing. Martin stood up abruptly, his composure shattering for the first time. His voice was raw, uncontrolled, stripped of every layer of charm and calculation that had defined him. She is nothing, he shouted, pointing at Jennifer. She was nothing before me, and she will be nothing after me. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Harmon did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Mr. Cole, sit down. And for the record, the woman standing before this court has demonstrated more integrity, resilience, and fitness as a parent than anything you have presented in these proceedings. This court rules as follows. Full custody of Lily Cole is awarded to Jennifer Cole. The emergency custody order is vacated. A permanent restraining order is issued against Martin Cole. Martin Cole is referred to the district attorney for investigation of financial fraud, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Child support is set at the maximum statutory amount, plus damages for emotional distress. Jennifer heard the words, but they took several seconds to reach the part of her brain that could process them. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, and felt Claire's hand on her arm. steady and real. She turned and looked at the gallery. Mark was there, his eyes glistening, his composure cracked just enough to show the depth of what he felt. Eleanor sat beside him, her expression unreadable, except for the slight trembling of her lower lip that betrayed the emotion she had spent 70 years learning to control. But Jennifer did not go to them first. She turned to Claire. "Thank you," she said, "for believing me before anyone else did." Then she walked to the gallery. She looked at Mark. Their eyes held. And in that silence lived every storm they had weathered, every fear they had faced, every moment of trust they had built from the wreckage of two broken lives. But the first thing she said was not about love or gratitude. It was practical, grounded, and entirely her own. "I need to go get my daughter." The drive to the foster care facility where Lily had been placed took 37 minutes. Jennifer drove herself. Claire sat in the passenger seat handling phone calls. Mark followed in a separate car, maintaining the legal distance until the restraining order against him was formally dissolved, which Claire had already filed paperwork to expedite. Jennifer parked, walked through the facility doors, signed the release papers, and was led to a small room where a foster mother was holding Lily in a rocking chair. The foster mother stood when Jennifer entered, and her expression carried the gentle understanding of someone who had returned children to their mothers before and knew the weight of the moment. Lily was asleep. Her dark hair had grown slightly in the 4 days since Jennifer had last held her. Her tiny fist was curled against her cheek, and she was making the soft, rhythmic breathing sounds that Jennifer had memorized in the 48 hours they had shared before she was taken. Jennifer reached out and took her daughter. The transfer was gentle, careful, and when Lily settled against Jennifer's chest, she made a small sound. Not a cry, not quite a sigh, but something in between that sounded like recognition. Jennifer held her and stood very still for a long time. She did not cry. She had expected to cry, had braced for the collapse, but what she felt instead was something quieter and more powerful than tears. It was completeness, the sensation of a fracture being set, a circuit being closed, a story returning to the only truth that had ever mattered. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered against Lily's hair. "Mommy is here. Mommy is not going anywhere ever again." They drove home in the late afternoon light, Lily secured in a car seat that Dee had bought and installed weeks before the birth, with the meticulous care of a woman who understood that preparation was its own form of love. Jennifer sat in the back seat beside her daughter, one hand resting on Lily's chest, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her palm. The guest house was exactly as she had left it, but it felt different now. The rooms that had been a refuge were becoming a home. The nursery she had prepared with borrowed furniture and second-hand blankets was warm and ready. And when Jennifer laid Lily in the crib for the first time, she stood over her and watched her breathe with the fierce, protective attention of a woman who would never again allow anyone to take what was hers. Dee came home from the hospital 5 days after the hearing. She was in a wheelchair temporarily, her ribs still healing, her lungs still recovering, but her spirit was entirely intact. Ray Santoro drove her to the guest house, and when Jennifer opened the door holding Lily, Dee's face underwent a transformation that compressed 20 years of grief and hope and loss into a single expression. "Did we win?" Dee asked, her voice rough from the hospital but carrying every ounce of its usual force. "Because if we did not, I am getting out of this chair and handling it myself." Jennifer knelt beside the wheelchair and placed Lily in Dee's arms. Dee held the baby with a tenderness that seemed impossible from a woman built of such visible toughness. And for the first time since Jennifer had known her, Dee opened the gold locket around her neck and showed Jennifer the photograph inside. It was a baby. A little girl with dark eyes and a face that would never grow older than the day the picture was taken. Her name was Grace, Dee said quietly. She lived for 11 hours. That was 20 years ago. I have been carrying her with me every day since. Jennifer put her hand over Dee's and said nothing, because some moments are too sacred for words, and the only adequate response is presence. Dee closed the locket, kissed Lily's forehead, and looked up at Jennifer with eyes that were wet but unbroken. You did it, honey. You actually did it. Jennifer shook her head. We did it. Every single one of us. Mark came to the guest house that evening, the first time he had been able to visit since the restraining order was lifted. He stood in the doorway and looked at Jennifer, holding Lily in the rocking chair, and something in his expression shifted in a way that Jennifer recognized because she had seen the same shift in her own reflection. It was the look of someone who had been carrying guilt for so long that it had become their identity, and who was suddenly, terrifyingly, being offered the possibility of letting it go. Can I come in? He asked. Jennifer nodded. Mark sat in the chair beside her, and for a long time they did not speak. Lily slept between them, oblivious to the significance of the moment, concerned only with the warmth and the steady breathing of the people who surrounded her. Finally, Mark spoke. I need to tell you something. I should have told you a long time ago. Jennifer waited. My wife Sarah died 2 years ago, in a car accident. She was driving away from our house after a fight, the worst fight we ever had. I said things I cannot take back. She got in the car, angry and upset, and she ran a red light 6 blocks from our home. She died before the ambulance arrived. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was the kind that comes from having practiced the words so many times they had worn smooth. When I found you, on that bench, when Dee asked me to help, I did not help because I am a good person, Jennifer. I helped because I was trying to undo something that cannot be undone. I was trying to save you because I could not save her. And somewhere along the way, my guilt became tangled up with my feelings for you in a way that was not fair to either of us. Jennifer listened without interrupting, without judgment, without the need to fix or reassure. She simply listened because she understood that some confessions need space more than they need response. I am not your savior, Mark continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I never was. You saved yourself, Jennifer. You saved Lily. Everything I did was the supporting role. And I need you to know that I see that. I see who you are, separate from what I need you to be for my own redemption. Jennifer reached over and took his hand. She held it firmly, grounding them both in the present. I know why you helped me, she said, and it does not diminish what you did. We are both carrying things, Mark. The difference is, we do not have to carry them alone anymore. They sat together in the quiet of the guest house while Lily slept and the evening light faded into the kind of soft darkness that feels like permission to rest. Eleanor Elliott visited the following weekend. She arrived in a town car, dressed impeccably, and stood in the doorway of the guest house with an expression that cost her considerable pride to wear. She looked at Jennifer, then at Lily, then back at Jennifer. I was wrong about you, she said, and the words came out stiff but sincere in the way that deeply private people express remorse. I spent my entire life in a family where strength meant controlling others. You showed me it means standing up when everything is trying to push you down. I owe you an apology, and I do not say that lightly. Jennifer invited her in. Eleanor held Lily with the careful awkwardness of a woman who had not held a baby in 40 years, but who remembered, somewhere beneath the layers of protocol, what it felt like to love something small and vulnerable. She looks like Mark when he was born, Eleanor said softly, and Jennifer understood that this was Eleanor's way of claiming Lily as family. The morning light in the renovated women's shelter on Cedar Street carried a particular quality that Jennifer had come to associate with new beginnings. It was warm, steady, and unapologetic, the kind of light that filled rooms and left no shadows to hide in. Jennifer stood in the main common area, a space she had redesigned from a cramped, institutional waiting room into something that felt like the living room of a home that loved whoever walked through its door. Soft colors on the walls, comfortable furniture arranged in clusters that encouraged conversation. A children's play area visible from every seat so that mothers could watch their kids while talking to counselors. A small kitchen where residents could cook their own meals if they wanted to, because Jennifer understood that the ability to feed yourself and your children was not a small thing. It was dignity. The shelter redesign was her first major project since restarting her interior design business. She had done it pro bono, and it had taken 3 months of work that she fit between caring for Lily, attending therapy twice a week, and slowly, deliberately, building a life that belonged entirely to her. Claire Buchanan had referred 4 new clients to her in the past 2 months, all women rebuilding their lives after divorces, all needing homes redesigned to reflect who they were becoming rather than who they had been forced to be. Jennifer understood this need on a level that no design school could teach, and her work carried an empathy and intentionality that her clients felt immediately. Dee had returned to the diner, but her role had expanded. The owner, impressed by the way Dee had managed the night shifts for years while he focused on his other locations, had offered her a co-management position. Dee had accepted with the condition that the diner maintain its unofficial policy of feeding anyone who walked in hungry, regardless of ability to pay. The owner agreed. The policy was never written down. It did not need to be. Dee's ribs had healed. The hit-and-run investigation, boosted by the security camera footage Ray had obtained, led to the arrest of Martin's personal driver, who cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony added another layer to the case. Building against Martin. Martin Cole was awaiting trial on 7 charges, including financial fraud, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit assault, and witness intimidation. His assets were frozen. His real estate business had collapsed after his partners, alerted to the embezzlement by Claire's countersuit, had filed their own lawsuits and dissolved the partnership. The apartment leased in Vanessa's name had been seized as part of the asset freeze. Gerald Cole had passed away 6 weeks after the hearing. His revised trust was ironclad, drafted by attorneys who specialized in exactly this kind of protective structure. $40 million sat in an account bearing Lily's name, managed by an independent trustee, untouchable until her 25th birthday. Martin would never see a cent of it. Vanessa Laurent had cooperated fully with prosecutors and was rebuilding her own life in a different city. She and Jennifer exchanged occasional text messages with the careful warmth of 2 women connected by a shared wound who respected each other's need for distance. Their last exchange had been simple. Vanessa wrote, "Thank you for not hating me. I should have seen it sooner." Jennifer replied, "We both should have. That is on him, not us." Mark and Jennifer were together, officially, publicly, and on terms that Jennifer had established with the same clarity she brought to everything now. She had kept the guest house for 3 months after the trial, maintaining her own space, her own routine, her own address. When she finally moved into the main house, it was because she chose to, not because she needed to. They were not perfect. Mark still struggled with the impulse to overprotect, to anticipate threats, to solve problems before Jennifer knew they existed. Jennifer still flinched at raised voices, still checked her bank account 3 times a day, still occasionally woke at 3 in the morning with the phantom sensation of rain on her skin and the echo of Martin's voice telling her she was nothing. But they talked about it. They argued about it sometimes. They went to couples counseling where a therapist named Dr. Williams helped them untangle the threads of guilt and trauma and love that had woven together into something complicated and real and worth protecting. Eleanor visited monthly. She never became warm in the traditional sense, but she became present, which for Eleanor was a far greater transformation. She established a college fund for Lily. She introduced Jennifer to her social circle with the specific phrasing, "This is Jennifer, my son's partner, and one of the most talented designers I have ever met," which from Eleanor was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Ray Santoro remained Mark's closest friend and had developed an unlikely bond with Dee, who appreciated his dry humor and his refusal to be impressed by anything. They argued about politics at the diner counter twice a week and agreed about absolutely nothing, which both of them seemed to enjoy immensely. On a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, 6 months after the trial, Jennifer was sitting on the floor of the guest house, which she had converted into her design studio, playing with Lily while reviewing fabric samples for a new project. Lily was 6 months old and had recently discovered the ability to laugh, a development that had reduced every adult in her life to complete emotional devastation on a daily basis. Dee was visiting, sitting in the armchair with a cup of coffee, watching Lily grab at Jennifer's fabric samples with the enthusiastic lack of discrimination that defined her approach to all objects within reach. Dee made a face at Lily, an exaggerated, ridiculous expression that involved crossing her eyes and puffing her cheeks. Lily stared at her for a moment with the intense seriousness that babies reserve for truly important phenomena. Then she laughed. A full, pure, unreserved baby laugh that filled the room and made time stop. Jennifer looked at Dee. Dee looked at Jennifer. They both started crying. Then they started laughing. Then they were doing both at the same time, which is the most honest expression of joy available to people who have survived enough to know how rare and precious it is. Mark walked in during this moment, took one look at the scene, and said, "Should I come back later?" Dee wiped her eyes. "Get in here and hold your daughter." She just laughed for the first time, and you almost missed it. Mark picked up Lily, who grabbed his nose with both hands, and laughed again. The sound was so perfect, so entirely free of everything ugly and cruel and broken that the world had tried to impose on her family, that Jennifer felt something settle inside her chest. Not hope. She was past hope now. Hope is what you feel when the outcome is uncertain. This was certainty. This was the knowledge, earned through suffering and proven through survival, that she had built something real. That evening, after Dee had gone home and Mark had fallen asleep on the couch with Lily on his chest, Jennifer walked to the window of the room that had once been a guest house and was now her studio, her business, her proof that she was more than what had been done to her. The night was clear, no rain, no storm, no thunder, just stars, scattered across the sky like a map of every possibility she had almost lost and fought to reclaim. She thought about this bench, the cold metal, the rain, the $43, the moment she believed she had nothing left. And she thought about Dee marching across that street with an umbrella and a coffee and the words, "She is with me." And she understood that survival is never a solo act. It is a chain of hands reaching through the dark, each one gripping the next, pulling forward, refusing to let go. She whispered into the quiet room, her voice steady, her words meant for no one and everyone. "You were born in a storm, little one, but storms do not last, and the women in your family, we are built to outlast every single one of them." She turned off the light, She walked to the couch. She lifted Lily gently from Mark's chest and carried her to the nursery, the room she had painted soft yellow in another life, another world, another version of herself that felt like a stranger now. She laid Lily in her crib, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and stood there for a moment, watching her daughter breathe. Then Jennifer Cole walked into the next room, sat down at her desk, and opened her laptop. She had a shelter to finish designing, clients to call in the morning, and a future to build. She got to work. Jennifer Cole walked into that storm with nothing but $43 and a promise to her unborn child. She walked out with something no one could ever take from her, the knowledge that she had saved herself. Not a millionaire, not a courtroom, her. And if her story reminds you of your own or someone you love, remember this. The most powerful thing you can do when the world tries to make you small is refuse. And if you are sitting on your own bench right now, in your own storm, with your own $43, remember that D is out there somewhere. The diner light is on. And you are not as alone as you think. Thank you for staying until the very end. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Subscribe so you never miss a story that reminds you what strength really looks like. And remember, every ending is just the beginning of something you have not imagined yet. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful storytelling with real emotional value. Every character, every scene, and every turning point was crafted with one purpose: to remind you that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep going when fear is all you have left. Thank you for being part of this community. We will see you in the next story.